So good morning. Let me call this meeting to order. Ask all attendees to mute the microphones and turn off their video. Before we begin, I will ask Elder Florence James to open our gathering.
Hai chichilsiam atanaquail. Tichome tewatal quatanaquail eat muxquail. Uni salt tanawat lim tal quatasiais. Limata seltstum tamoch. Hai chatanaquail. Shwaina stala. I lift my hands in honor. Dear Creator, thank you here on this day. Please help us today and all our days. We ask you to help us, protect us as we go about doing the work today together. And we welcome you to the sacred lands of Penelakut. Haicha, Tlatamsta, thank you. Enough sufficient.
Thank you very much, Elder Florence. So let me offer greetings to all of you that are joining us for this gathering. Although we are meeting now in the global commons, that is cyberspace, we at the Center for Global Studies wish also to acknowledge particularly that we meet on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria and the Center for Global Studies stand, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. My name is Rod Dobell. I'm privileged to hold the position of Older Research Associate at the Center for Global Studies. Oliver Schmidtke, the director of the center, sends his regrets. He's unable to be here at this time, but he's asked me to fill in, and I'm honored to do so. So we ask that you please keep your microphone muted, your camera turned off unless you're instructed differently by the chair. Feel free to use the chat feature, just down at the bottom of the screen, for engaging in discussion and debate with other participants to share resources. After the presentation, there'll be a question period. If you wish to ask a question, you can either use the raise hand function, or you can type your question into the chat box. Notice that the raise hand function is found under the label at the bottom of the screen called participants. You can open this participant sidebar and then select at the left-hand edge the raise hand feature to have your name added to the speaker list, and Stephanie will take note of the order of speakers and pass them on to me. So that's the process for asking the question, and I think we're then ready to move on to the meeting itself. Before I welcome our panelist presenters, whom I'll introduce in a moment, let me note that this meeting is being recorded. The talks can be found, this talk and previous talks can be found as indicated on the Center for Global Studies website. So if there's nothing further, I'm happy to introduce the presenters for today's session. And those include Elder Florence James, from whom we've heard, an elder of the Coast Salish Nation living on Penelakut Island. Elder Ivor Provost, Piikani First Nation, manager of the Piikani Nation consultation process. Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper of the Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement, and Indigenous Wisdom Advisory Panel member. Karen Smith-Fardy, Knowledge Coproduction Advisor and Facilitator. Gleb Gorodetsky, who's an author, an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta, and a research affiliate of the Polis Project here at the Center for Global Studies. And our own Kelly Bannister is a co-director of the Polis Project, CFGS associate, and I guess a moderator for these sessions. So I'm happy then to ask the presenters to take over this discussion. Kelly?
Thank you so much, Rod, and thanks everybody for coming here today and joining us today in this virtual ethical space. I think I'd like to just ask if our presenters, Ira and Elmer, Karen and Gleb, and Florence is with me, if we could, if our cameras are available, we could just briefly give our greetings, do a round of greetings and brief introductions.
Oki nagsukuan nastuko kapikanikwad. Kitkanets matsnachboao. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ira Provost. I'm from the Piikani Nation in Southern Alberta, and very happy to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor for me to participate in this virtual ethical space Zoom meeting. My name is Elmer Ghostkeeper, and I live on the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement, northeast of Edmonton. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the lack of video feed. Not able to master the technology this morning. My name is Gleb Gorodetsky. It's an honor to be part of this process. Thank you, Kelly, for pulling it together, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Elder Florence, for the opening us up in a good way. And I'm entering in this space as an ally to this work of bridging across knowledge systems. I'm very excited for this dialogue, and I want to also greet the other elders on the call and thank you, Kelly, for gathering us all together.
Thank you, Ira, Elmer, Karen, Gleb, and also Florence, who's beside me, for coming together in this space, and for everyone for joining us. We have been doing this work together for some time now, and I would like to begin by just very briefly sharing just, I guess, a glimpse of this work that we've been working on, the developing some new ethical guidelines for knowledge sharing and co-production. I'm just going to ask your patience as I screen share. And I'll just get some slides up. Okay. So I'd just like to begin with saying that the people who are standing with me today, it's a great privilege to stand together with them. And they've introduced themselves. And we'd also like to acknowledge that there are many more people, directly and indirectly, who have been involved in this work of developing some ethical guidelines for knowledge sharing and co-production. And we're all in this together, but the small team that's agreed to present today are pretty much the stewards, I guess, of this work. And it's live work. It's very much in progress. And we are really pleased to be able to share where we are at with this work today. I know there's been a lot of interest in this, and we're very grateful for that. Forgive me, I have to figure out how to go there. So it was really difficult for me to figure out where, how to share kind of a long story in a short amount of time. And I thought, where should I start? There's so many starting places. I decided I'll just start with putting up the 9 draft principles that comprise the ethical guidelines that we're going to be speaking to today. And I'll just let you have a look at them. We won't be able to go through them in detail today, but at least you can have a glimpse and overview of what they're about. And so this work, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the origins. We were able to come together about 2 years ago at the request of a team within the government of Alberta who was looking to have some assistance in addressing some issues in their environmental community-based monitoring work in the field, and in how to work together well across Western science and Indigenous knowledge systems among Western scientists and Indigenous knowledge holders and Indigenous communities and practitioners and various people who are involved in this work from many different backgrounds. And so that was the invitation for a group of us to come together and think about how we could proceed to develop something that would be of use, would be timely, and aid us in this aspiration we have to work well together. The title of the guidelines are about knowledge sharing and co-production, and if the term knowledge co-production is new to you, it's really about, it involves how to braid knowledge systems together in a good way that is respectful and equitable and leads to good outcomes for all involved. The thing about Zoom is it's in the way of my slides. Okay, there. There's a lot of different aspects of this work that I could share, but I think one fundamental concept is one of ethical space. And I was first introduced to this concept by the work of Willie Ermine and by Willie himself. And Willie talks about this ethical space as a space between the Indigenous and Western spheres of knowledge. And so he's not just talking about the commonality or overlap, but really this alive space that really is an opportunity, is an invitation of us coming together across our differences and learning how to step into this new space and in a respectful way, and find ways to work together well. Ethical space, I would say, is a relational space and is really an invitation. Willie talks about ethical space as not a noun, but really an opportunity for stepping in or being together and acting together in new ways. And I really like this definition by Greenwood and all, talking about ethical space. When 2 or more parties enter into respectful partnership or relationship at the interface of distinct ways of being and knowing, the desire to be self-reflexive, to honor and understand the other, and to interact with humility activates ethical space. Thus, ethical space can be understood more in terms of active space, process, action, and energy than in terms of physical space. I won't really speak much to this slide except to say that one of our elders and Indigenous members, Red Chu, really helped us understand ethical space can be a tool, an enabling tool in many ways, and one as a methodology in helping us find links between and parallels between different systems. In this case, we're interested in Western scientific systems and perhaps Western scientific codes of conduct that relate to scientific integrity and research ethics. And in the other case, Indigenous systems, Indigenous knowledge systems, and Indigenous principles. And in the case we really took a look at, and with gratitude, the principles of the Indigenous Wisdom Advisory panel's work themselves. And they have outlined for their own work in advising the chief scientist of the Alberta government, outlined 6 principles that would assist them in implementing their mandate. We've had the great privilege of receiving advice, being gifted advice from many of the panel members, and Elmer Ghostkeeper himself is an IWAP panel member with us today, still walking here with us in the weeds, right through thick and thin. We're very grateful for that. And one of the key learnings that we took away from the IWAP members and the IWAP principles was this idea that the principles are not conceived in isolation or individually, but are interrelated and intended to be held all together. And so this really helped us understand a way of holding principles in this interrelated way, the ethical space and all our relations, all our relationships in that in-between space. There's been a number of aspects of the development of these guidelines, and one major one has been a workshop that we had in February of 2019, where we were able to bring together 60 elders and knowledge holders and practitioners and Western scientists, and we came together for presentations and World Cafe style working sessions. And it was a very, very interesting methodology that we chose to use, identifying what are the primary ethical issues, in this case in community-based monitoring, and asking how do the Western scientific principles of scientific integrity and those kinds of values, how do they help us address our issues in one case? And you can see in the picture on the left, there's a picture of Elmer. He's sitting at the table with colleagues, and looking at this principle, concern for welfare, which often features in research ethics involving humans. So how does concern for welfare help us and guide us in addressing some of the ethical issues on the ground? And we did a parallel exercise. You can see a picture on the right where we took the IWAP principles, in this case, humility and the trickster is one of the principles, and we asked, how do those principles help us in guiding us, how we could work our way through the ethical issues? And so in this way, we were able to identify gaps and also seek advice on how we could identify gaps by developing some new guidelines and new guidance. And so just as a summary, the ethical guidelines that we have at this point in an internal draft, but we hope will be coming to a form in the very near future where we can share them publicly and get more feedback. We have 9 interrelated principles that I flashed up at the beginning. That's the co-creation of ethical space for this respectful knowledge exchanges, and this whole idea of ethical spaces that it's respecting the integrity and the autonomy of the different knowledge systems, their oral tradition or their written tradition, and finding ways to honor and respect those different processes and ways and that those knowledge systems rely on. So we see these guidelines as a tool to enable relationship building and collaboration between Western trained scientists and Indigenous communities. And one of the really, I think, innovative features and necessary features in these guidelines are that they're written in this continuous verb tense ending in ing on purpose. And this is to reflect our commitment to the idea that ethics is living, always present, and compels us to see ethics as an ongoing action rather than just an idea or an ideal. Just like the IWAP principles, these have been designed in a way or envisioned in a way of non-hierarchy, integrated, and to be held together. And I think for me personally, having worked in research ethics for a long time, what I'm really excited about is that these principles extend fundamental ethical concepts like respect for human dignity and beyond just research involving humans, to be more inclusive of more than just humans, and consider intercultural, interspecies, and intergenerational aspects of reconciling diverse ways of knowing. Here's just an example to highlight. I mentioned the principle respect for human dignity, which is well entrenched in ethical and legal norms internationally. and a very, very important principle. But feedback from our workshop participants was, well, we need something more to help us highlight the interconnectedness of all things and respect for all life, human and non-human. And so there was a very strong sense of needing to go beyond respect for just humans and the idea of personhood. So one of the first principles that we've articulated is respecting the inherent dignity and interconnectedness of all our relations. Just to give you a little tiny glimpse into the guidelines. Another one I'll mention that I think is really fundamental, a long time coming in ethics, is understanding that Indigenous languages matter. And there's a quote here from Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper, who may speak to this point later in the presentation, helping us learn how Indigenous languages hold the knowledge and the voice of the land. And by working in English rather than in the language of the land, we're already losing and translating and missing and perhaps misinterpreting some of that fundamental knowledge that we need to care for our earth and work together. And finally, Coprotecting Indigenous knowledge came directly from the meeting with the IWAP panel members themselves, asking us, well, if we're going to co-create knowledge, how are we going to protect it as well? And so the principles really uphold this idea that we're not sitting equally with these knowledge systems in terms of existing protections. Western systems may have intellectual property rights that really work to protect aspects of that knowledge system, but that doesn't necessarily work very well. And perhaps it doesn't work well at all in many cases to protect Indigenous knowledge from intentional or unintentional, often unintentional misinterpretation, misuse, and misappropriation. So that was my speedy glimpse of the guidelines, and hopefully it's piqued your interest to perhaps get involved and perhaps hear more at another time. The next phases we foresee in the guidelines development will involve getting a draft ready, internal draft with the group here that's presenting, ready for expert review and vetting, and we anticipate and hope that we will be able to release a public version in the near future, and the longer term goal is to develop some implementation tools. So I just want to thank you for your kind attention for my little whirlwind, and I would like to invite Elder Elmer Ghostkeeper to make a few comments. And because Elmer's on the phone, he's not able to have Zoom where he lives. He agreed to let me post his favorite picture of him. So this is Elmer at our ethics workshop, and he's holding Arlo, a young babe, one of the children of one of the participants, and then that's me by his side. So I'll invite you, Elmer, to please make your comments if you would.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's an honor, to participate in this, with Elder Florence James and Elder Ira Provost. Also with our colleagues, Gleb and Karen, who really did a lot of the work behind the scenes, as you know. It takes a lot of participation and co-production to get to this stage. I'm going to pick up on what Kelly had mentioned about sounds. It's my understanding that the words I'm speaking now are simply sounds. And I'm speaking English sounds. So I think I can fairly say that the words of English were co-produced or produced in England, to the environment of England, and then those sounds were brought over here to North America during colonization, and then the attempt was to rename everything, even though every aspect of Turtle Island was already named by multiple oral Indigenous languages. Igwa omsi sekapik squeon, da kayatsamoyan. And when I speak this way, I'm also making sounds. But the meaning sits in the sound that I'm making, so you can then interpret it back into a word. And where do those sounds come from? It's also my understanding that Mother Earth creates the sounds. And humans, when we adapt to our environment through the concept of culture, we start attaching meaning to those sounds. You know, linguists tell us that perhaps in North America, especially in Canada, there are over 300 different Indigenous oral languages across the Canadian landscape, because the environment is so different and the sounds are so different from our environment. You know, and I'm sure Elder Florence understands that the sounds of the West Coast, where she grew up and her ancestors have lived for millennia, are different than the sounds where I live in the boreal forest. We were told that we were speaking Bushland Cree, and that's my first language. My second language is Michif, and my third language is English. But one of the difficulties of translation of an oral language, Indigenous oral language in this case, to English, is that a lot of the meaning is lost because the sounds are different. So we can never get an accurate definition and meaning of some of the words, the sounds we're using. We lose a lot of the meaning in the translation. And maybe I think that's a cultural screen that protects the Indigenous oral language. So that was a challenge as well. And I know sometimes a lot of the oral languages, Indigenous oral languages, are taught, but at the same time, they're using the English alphabet to spell the words. That also distorts or changes the meaning and the sounds of the words. So it's a difficult process, but we tried our best to do it, you know, using English in this case. And my observation is that it's always been, when researchers come visit Indigenous communities, they expect the Indigenous people to learn English rather than remaining in their own language. It should be the researchers that learn the oral language of the people who they're talking to. But that's not the case in Canada, and I don't think worldwide. It always seems to be the other way. Also, when we begin a ceremony, actually we create a sacred space by performing ceremony, opening prayers, and possibly smudging. But when we're sitting in a formal sense, in this case, we're creating an ethical space. So both knowledge systems, Western scientific knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, is treated as equal in every which way. One does not dominate the other, as it has been in the past. So it's been a challenge, and especially when I see Western scientific researchers coming north, you know, they want to study the lake and determine all the fish in the lake, not realizing that the Indigenous people that have lived around that lake and fished in that lake know all the species of the fish already. But they weren't asked, and if they were asked, they weren't given credit for their knowledge. It was packaged and taken back to an institution in that way, and really trivialized in a lot of ways. But now, with the challenge ahead of us, especially through climate change, and maybe even in this pandemic we're all experiencing, there's more and more, I think, understanding and acceptance of an Indigenous oral language and some of the wisdom that's embedded in there. For example, Kelly talked about the trickster in Indigenous worldview and languages. There's always trickster. So maybe this virus is playing the role of a trickster, tricking the scientists to keep ahead of them, so they cannot right off the bat or initially find a vaccine. And what's the teaching of the virus? What's the teachings and the lessons of the virus? We know it's a living being, and you know, in the same aspect as we are, created by Mother Earth. What's its purpose and function for humanity? That's a question I think a lot of, at least in this part of the world, elders are thinking about. And there's no question that once we get to know more about it and become friends with it, we will then find a vaccine to slow its spread. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ira now, and he'll share his wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Elmer. And if we were in a physical space, we would be gifting you with a blanket right now, but this is being held for you and will be sent to you at when the circumstances allow. We're very grateful for your knowledge and your wisdom that you're sharing with us. And thank you, Ira.
Okay, good morning once again. I'll officially bring greetings on behalf of my nation. Idam skanatani nisdogo pikani kwan natutu pikani sixgates tepi. I want to thank, first of all, I want to officially acknowledge Elder Florence for her prayer this morning. Her words of encouragement, her words of wisdom. Even before everyone joined in, we had a discussion. It was very, very nice to hear. So I thank you, Elder Florence, for that. I want to thank Elmer for his talk. Thank you. Every time I sit and visit with Elmer or hear him, I learn so much. I want to thank Kelly and Gleb and Karen for inviting me today. It's really been an encouraging road, I think, that we've been on for the last couple of years. I just want to tell you a little bit about where I'm from, the perspective that I'm bringing to the table today. So I'm from the Blackfoot Confederacy. We're a nation that's a part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. We're the Piikani Nation. And with the Blackfoot Confederacy, there's 4 of us. There's the Piikani, there's the Blood Tribe, Siksika, and then we also have counterparts down in the U.S. with who we call the Amskapi Piikani. And together we share a common language. And we've been in the space that we are at in southern Alberta in what we call our territory, Napi's territory, since, of course, time immemorial. And we bring greetings from our nation to the nation that's hosting today with Kelly and Florence. So I greatly honor you and this space. So professionally, my role in my community is working with our leadership. And with our leadership, we meet with external parties that come into our community to ask our opinion, to ask our perspective on many things. My area to be particular is in the area of consultation, in the area of land development. And my primary function is to ask projects and initiatives, what impact is there to the Section 35 rights of Indigenous people? And so I work with proponents primarily to understand what that relationship is. And then I relate it back to my community. And in doing so, I also wear another hat in my community. I'm the manager of our Elder Center, or our traditional, our cultural center. It's called Piikani Traditional Knowledge Services. And it's a great center in that I get to marry that work with the work that our consultation office does. So we engage our elders from our community a great deal, and we carry that knowledge to apply to developing relationships with people from outside the community. And then there's our community. What I also do is I engage our community to inform them and keep them abreast of developments that are happening outside of our community borders in what we refer to as our territory. So all these people I have an accountability to. All these people that I've just mentioned, and there's a great many of them. I have a responsibility. Personally, I'll be quite honest with everyone here. I still am uncomfortable being called an elder. I would probably prefer a knowledge keeper. But I do have the rights in our culture of what an elder should be. And I do that with pride. I do that with honor and humility. My wife and I, we're very much a part of our traditional ways, a part of our traditional societies, and we hold that responsibility dear. Just this morning, we were talking about the preparations that we have to make and think about for this summer's ceremonies and how that's going to look. And in doing so, what I find is that having that responsibility to work with proponents, to work with academics, to work with people from outside our community, there's a lot of responsibility. And I know that. And it's something that I need to hold dear to the work that I do. Whenever I work with people, what my guiding light is, how does this make me stand and sit with my people from my community? Before we started this morning, Karen asked Elder Florence a little bit about her background. And I was really fortunate to hear that conversation. I apologize, I didn't jump in. I just wanted to hear the stories. And Elder Florence talked about some of her personal life, some of her personal happenings. And it was just like, with all due respect, it was just like hearing one of my aunties or one of my elders talk in my community. And that was so warm to hear, but also how like we are. I am positive I've never been to Elder Florence's area. I have been to Victoria. but I've never been to that part. But I already feel a connection to your area. I got to know Elmer for the last couple of years, and right away, like, I think he can speak to it as well. I feel this connection. And there's another gentleman that we work with in other circles. His name is Fred. He works for the Deneta. He's an elder there. And I just love sitting with him. And when we talk, he talks about the ideas and the experiences that are happening in his community. And it's such a rich conversation, but it opens my eyes and it gives me appreciation for all the other Indigenous communities that, even though I'm an Indigenous, I'm living that, we can't look at Indigenous perspective or concern as a one size fits all. We're all similar, but we're also very unique. And that's what I've learned when working with these other elders, and there's so much there to learn. So what I want to talk a little bit about in all of this is that idea of accountability. Some of my other work has been involved in studying the ideas of cultural appropriation. And unfortunately, this has happened time and time again to Indigenous communities. I consider myself, what I interpret myself is as a Blackfoot guardian, and the guardian who has the responsibility of looking after his culture, looking after their culture, to ensure that there's a reduction of harm. Our people in the Blackfoot Confederacy and my elders that I work with, the elders that I learned from, they're very generous people. They're like a favorite aunt or a favorite uncle that you just really enjoy spending time with. And they're generous. They're very generous with their knowledge. But at times that generosity has been tried. That generosity has been misused or misrepresented, and we've seen many evidences of that. I'm very much for sitting down and sharing information as to what's appropriate, but there are guidelines and there are limitations as to how and what information should and shouldn't be shared, especially more so when, of course, we talk about sensitive cultural material. When I'm out talking and when I'm out there in the field or speaking in a public space like this, I always think, if an elder was sitting right beside me, just like Kelly right now, is that elder going to like what I hear? Or is that elder going to say, no, wait a minute, Ira, there's something not right here? So I'm always on guard. I'm always protective of what I have to say or what I should share. I think that's the proper thing to do, to have your elders or your people very close to you. And if you don't have a relationship with them, it's good to have that relationship. And then think about those teachings constantly in the work that you do. What would they say? Is this right? Is this serving the common good in our community? That's something that I'm hyper aware of. I have to be. So when we talk about developing ethical space and what it actually realizes itself for our community, these are some of the guiding principles. And some of my graduate work, I studied the idea that I found really interesting in Indigenous research methodology is the idea, Wilson's ideas of relational accountability, and it's bang on as to how I need to live my life, to live my professional life. And I'm very encouraged to hear that a lot of our partners and our people in the community are now searching for those types of things. But I'll wrap up here, and I just, again, I want to thank everyone for the space. I'll be happy to answer some questions later. But just to sum up what I've said, I really believe that we need to understand and always keep in mind that for us, for every individual Indigenous nation, the idea of ethics is very specific to who they are. What are their community protocols? What do their community protocols and laws and natural laws require of them to uphold? When I think about that, I need to think about that, and that's what I would share with you. However, I can't tell Elmer, I can't tell any other elder what they should or shouldn't do. It's up to them with their community and how they're able to proceed given their own sacred and natural laws. But in a sense, it's being relational, not just to myself, not just to my department, and not even to my chief. It's the idea of our entire community. Is this serving their best need? And I think that's something that needs to guide me and has guided me as an Indigenous practitioner in this work that we do. So again, I want to thank you. I'll pass it back to you now, Kelly, and thank everyone for their time. Thank you.
Hi,
Chika. Thank you, Ira, for those words, for the wisdom, for your teachings. We are very grateful. And again, the gift that we would love to give you right now will be sent to you, and in appreciation for spending time with us today. Thank you. I'd just like to see whether Gleb might have a brief word that he might want to add or comment.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, all the elders and Elder Florence, for creating this space for dialogue in virtual universe. That's quite an accomplishment, so I'm grateful. It's a privilege to be listening to our elders and our teachers in this process. And I just have one thing to add from my perspective, is that I've been working for and with Indigenous peoples for in different capacities for a number of years, and observed many interactions with outside interests, and quite a few of those interactions are researchers or managers coming in with great intentions and really wanting to do good things, but not necessarily having the necessary tools to help them establish and maintain trustworthy and lasting, respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples, communities, knowledge holders, elders. And what we are trying to do here, with developing this ethical guidelines, is to provide some guidance, to provide those tools. And from my perspective, the main focus is those external researchers or partners engaging with Indigenous communities, but it's also a document that Indigenous communities can hold up to researchers coming in to work with them and hold them accountable. So I'm really excited about the work that we've been doing, and very much look forward to the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gleb. Gleb's been a part of this work for a very long time, even before this particular guidelines development work began, and I have great appreciation and respect for all that he's brought to these kinds of processes. And so thank you, Gleb. Karen, is there a brief comment that you might like to share with us?
I'm really keen on opening up to the dialogue and with the lovely people that have joined us in this space. I really want to focus too on as a non-Indigenous ally to this work of the importance of acknowledgement of the privileging of Indigenous knowledge and yet seeking, as you were outlining in the very beginning within the PowerPoint, building bridges across the knowledge systems and the worldviews so that we can collectively reach new insights. And like Elder Elmer was saying, in this time is a very good example of how we need that as a world community. And so I think this work speaks to that. And one of the principles that I think, yeah, Kelly, I don't know if you can pull up that slide again, but the one that I really hold really close to my heart is the principle around embracing humility and proceeding with precaution in the knowledge sharing and when we're seeking towards knowledge co-production. And I thank Ira for bringing forward his perspective of a sense of huge responsibility to his community. And I feel the same when I'm seeking out and sitting with elders and Indigenous knowledge holders. There's deep responsibility and humility, and we need to proceed with a lot of precaution. And that's, from my perspective, acknowledging the complexity in working with different methodologies and worldviews and values and languages and these knowledge systems. And we need tools, and I think that this is positioning that as perhaps a tool. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Karen. And just to wrap up our presentation piece before we move on to questions, and I don't know about answers, but maybe we could have some exchanges. I'd like to invite our Elder Florence if she has any comments for us, or reflections or words she'd like to share.
So listening to all of you, I come from a thought that my ancestors placed in my mind to always have love for all nations. Look at the world as one community. Working together is our way we're reaching each other through technology. I get to see you. I wish I could embrace you as I'm taught, and for the work that you do to walk with us in a gentle, respectful way. And just to let you know that I just experienced the ethics part of this work when, regarding traditional knowledge, I had to go to court for 5 of our nations about the land, and there was me by myself in the courthouse, and there was 18 lawyers which were my opponents. And the only way that I could beat the odds was I used my language to give myself the empowerment to speak. Plus I had to teach the judge all about our traditional knowledge and oral history, what it means. And it broke my heart because we're not supposed to teach. It's a law in our hidden law within our nation from my grandma that I was to never teach it to anyone because I'm breaking the rules for oral history. But I used a lot of my language that I knew how to name the lands, how to speak to someone that had more power than I, and which means BC, Canada, all the lawyers that were there representing the nation. nation that is mais. So I cried because I had to release the information, and I felt like I betrayed my ancestors. But I did it in the hopes of the young generation that we're going to help them in some way. They need to know how to be connected to the earth. And a lot of our people don't speak the language, so that was the big loss. And the way that they communicate, they don't have a way to communicate to the earth without not knowing the language. It's been taken away by BC and Canada and all the ways that they banished the culture and language of the Coast Salish people and others. So the way that you make me feel good is when I read the words for the ethics towards the respect to traditional knowledge and culture. I could not express in enough proper words to you to hear you say what you do. And to Ira, thank you for the recognition, which I get little of, and this part of my territory. So just to hear you say that you acknowledge what I said is something that I hold very dear, especially as Kelly. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. So I think with that, I do want to thank all of our presenters. It's been a wonderful experience listening to all and the thoughts, the ideas on extending our appreciations and our wisdom into the ethical space that's been described here is something that will require a lot more reflection and, as Bud suggests, a lot more thought about how we bring these ideas more effectively into the university as well as the community more broadly. So thank you all very much. We'll stop here.
And Rod, we'll just invite Florence to close the session for us in a good way.
Hi, teacher, Siamatanakoya, Kusu Itu Zewatal, Kutstus Great Namat, Hi, Chatas Hiais, the Himatish de Stalks, at the Hiais, at the Snow Isle, Hi, Tatlamsta. Dear Creator, thank you. You did indeed help us here on this day. Help us to connect, to be together, and to do the work that's much required in the way of respectful words, that's into practice and that we need to do more of. Thank you. Thank you for the guidance in a spiritual way. Amen in your language.